Hello, welcome to Workplace Wake Up. I'm Jen Shaw. Every week, I spend about 15 minutes covering key legal developments, introducing you to interesting guests, and providing some entertainment to start your workday. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. I'm having so much fun this holiday season. My lights are up, my tree's up, my decorations are up. Everything's ready to roll. We're baking like fiends. It's so much fun. So we're going to talk about pay transparency just to bring us all back to earth for a few minutes. Okay, what's going on? First of all, one of the things that we need to talk about is that this remote worker trend is not going away. Okay, I think a lot of people thought that the end of COVID as we knew it, the big crisis of COVID, might bring an end to remote workers and people would all come back to work. Hasn't happened. Now, obviously, we're going to have a new president in January. Elon Musk is evidently going to be leading a department called DOGE, which is kind of ironic, the Department of Governmental Efficiency. And one of the things he's looking at is bringing back federal workers to the office. Okay? And I don't know what's going to happen with that. It's all kind of crazy. But with federal workers, it's not that complicated because wherever they are, wherever they're working, the rules are the same. They're subject to federal law. And unless their state law is more strict, and in most states it isn't. Totally different with state pay transparency laws. Because what we've got going on is a huge trend towards enacting these pay transparency laws throughout the country. So, of course, California has had a pay transparency law for a while. Right now, it applies to employers with 15 or more employees total, as long as one of them is in California. Requires you to report various pieces of data regarding your employees, including their sex, their race, their ethnicity, and, of course, their compensation. Colorado applies. They have a similar rule, only if you have one employee in Colorado. In New York, similar rule applies if you have 4 or more employees anywhere in the world. And any role that works at least partially in New York. New York City, by the way, has its own ordinance. So it's getting more complicated because it's just not state law. In Maryland, we have a pay transparency for any work that's going to be physically performed in Maryland. New Jersey, we're expecting them to implement something in 2025. In Illinois, we have something very close to what we're doing in California. So if you are an employer that allows your employees to work anywhere they want remotely, which is nice and kind and generous. In fact, I was thinking the other day, when COVID shut down the schools, okay, so March of 2020, it didn't even dawn on me to, let's move to Paris and go to school in Paris, Ella, and I can work remotely. So many people did that. It was such a fabulous idea. And Ella did school online and I came to the office every day because Ronnie and I felt like we wanted to be here. You all know I've talked about this. I'm not a good at-home worker. Anyway, the bottom line is, folks, if you let people work remotely, more power to you. That's great. We have people who work remotely. That's fine. But you have got to make sure you're complying with the state law. Okay, so there are various laws in each location that you need to be paying attention to so that you are very clear that you are complying with those laws. It's not enough to say, oh, we have headquarters in Illinois and Chicago, so it doesn't matter where they work. We're just going to make sure we follow the law that would apply in Chicago. No, it doesn't work that way. So first thing you have to do is you have to think about where is everyone? So you better have a practice, a protocol that requires people to tell you where they are now and to notify you within, 2 weeks in advance, at least, of moving their remote location on a regular basis, meaning not that they're going to be out of town for the weekend working in Connecticut, but that they've decided to relocate, okay? And by the way, that relocation may be, I'm going to be there for a year and see how it goes. Well, they've still decided, at least for the foreseeable future, to be in a new location. So you've got to track where they are. Like, where are these folks? And you want to let people know, listen, we're not just going to unilaterally approve you to work where you want to work. There are various states, for example, where you might not want to have an employee. If you're not a California employer, you'd be crazy to let somebody telework in California, because then you're going to get all of the California laws that none of us want to deal with. So first thing you've got to do is know what all the state laws are. Now, if you have a limited universe, let's say you've only got 20 employees and they all work in 3 states, then you can take the position of you're just going to comply with the most stringent of those laws and be consistent across the organization. Sometimes you can't do that. You also have to track the numbers of employees, right? Because I told you in California, you just need 1 employee in the state. Colorado, 1 employee in the state. New York, you need 4 employees in the state. So every pay transparency law has something different going on. You also have to know, what does the law actually require? So for example, in California, you have to provide salary ranges, okay? So that folks can figure out, all right, well, my range in this job would be between X and Y. That, by the way, that is not a midpoint. It is a range. So you have to give from the low to the high for that role. Obviously, many of us are going to have very broad ranges for jobs because it depends on who you hire, who you can get, and what their experience level is. But you've got to track those additional requirements. It's not just about compensation. Sometimes in California, you've got the posting requirement, you've got other things that you need to be thinking about. You also need to know what information needs to be communicated, both externally and internally. For example, some of these laws require that you communicate about promotional opportunities and new openings. You also want to make sure, if you are using recruiting companies, you're using staffing companies. A lot of folks during COVID said to me, this is too much for me to deal with. I'm just going to use a staffing company. I'm just going to use somebody who can just send me a person in a particular location. Well, what you have to understand is many times those staffing agencies, they are hiring people who work remotely too. So all of a sudden, you think you're hiring a California employee to work remotely, and it turns out they're actually working in New York. So you've got to have an arrangement with these agencies to make clear, hey, you've got to tell us what state these folks are working in. And you want to make sure that the agency themselves, not you, is making sure that they're following all of the requirements for that particular jurisdiction. So you don't want to be in a situation where you're supposed to be telling the temp agency, oh, there's a law in Illinois that you better make sure you comply with, and New York City has its own pay transparency law. You don't want to be going through that process. You want them to be responsible for that. But the only way they're going to be responsible for that is if you put it in the document, right? You put it in the agreement that you enter into with these agencies. So you really have to be careful and think about, what are you going to do to comply with these rules? And look, there's a lot of information available on the internet. I mean, it's easier now than it's ever been to try to track state laws and figure out what's going on. But the truth is, this is a full-time job, depending on how many people you have working remotely. You really want to think about your resource allocation, and do you really want to have people in all 50 states? If you don't need it, then you may want to just ask your staffing agency or your recruiters internally to only recruit for, very limited locations, because you don't want to be going down that road. Obviously, the job market is tight. It is hard to find qualified folks. So when you think about, gosh, I hate to exclude people from New Hampshire or from Florida or Georgia or wherever, I really would rather have them be available to me. That's fine. There's no problem with that, but you have to be sure you're in compliance. So the word for 2025, folks, is compliance. Have we done what we're supposed to do? Are we dotting our I's and crossing our T's? Are we complying with the rules and the laws we're supposed to be complying with? I want you focusing on that for 2025, because we're going to have a lot on our plate as a nation. We're going to have a lot on our plate as individuals. We've got some economic things we're trying to work out. The last thing you need as an organization is to get sued. So you have got to put the resources and the time and the energy into compliance. And this pay transparency is a big deal. We all know what has happened historically, right? You hire someone 30 years ago, and maybe there was some bias in the hiring. So you paid a woman less than you paid a man because, frankly, you could get away with it. So you did it. Well, the problem is if you didn't catch that woman up, right? You might be thinking about Lilly Ledbetter, right? She was one of the famous plaintiffs before the United States Supreme Court in the last 20 years. And she said, look, I was hired at a lower wage and they kept perpetuating that by giving me the same raises they were giving everyone else. So I never caught up. And this is your year to get caught up. This is your year to look at your pay practices. Are you consistent? Have you hired new people in doing the same job as your current employees and not given them a raise? Not only is that a potential problem with your culture and with employee retention, you may have a legal issue depending on who is currently on your staff and who you are hiring. So this is not an area for you to take lightly. You need to know what is going on with compensation. And obviously, when it comes to remote workers, it's not just pay transparency laws that you need to be thinking about. You need to know, well, how do we classify employees as exempt or non-exempt? What salary basis test are we looking at? You remember, you're going to always follow the Fair Labor Standards Act unless the state law is more protective. Well, many, many states are getting more protective, even in states that traditionally have just followed the national rule, right? The Department of Labor regulations or the National Labor Relations Act. Okay, so you want to think about the Fair Labor Standards Act and all of these rules. And if you're not complying with a state law or a municipal ordinance, like in New York City, you're going to face some serious liability potentially. So I know it's already the middle of December. We're almost at the middle of December, but you got to get this on your list for next year. Okay. So if you don't already have a plan for compliance and what you're going to be doing, and you are living like I do right now, day to day, call to call, never getting ahead, trying to get things done, always feeling behind, we need to improve. You and me, we got to do this better. Because the truth of the matter is, we cannot do what we need to do without planning and forethought. So even if you have a lot on your plate, and I know you do for 2025, please take an hour in the next week before our next podcast. Take an hour to sit down and think about, all right, what are my pay practices? What are my policies? Do I have something I need to do differently? Just spend an hour. Next week during the podcast, we're going to talk about sort of a year-end checklist of things for you to look at. But pay transparency needs to be at the top of that list because of all these state laws. And if you've got remote workers, you need to deal with all of those laws in the locations where you have people working. And remember, a lot of times a remote worker will want to tell you, well, I'm only going to be here temporarily. Well, let's face it, folks, we're all here temporarily, right? None of us have a pass or the ability to be on Earth for the, indefinite future. So you want to be careful about what people are telling you. And I go back to how we kicked off this podcast this morning. You need to have a process that requires people to tell you where they are working. Okay, so if you've got those remote workers, they need to be letting you know, where are they? And the city matters. As we have learned, there are various cities and counties and municipalities that have enacted their own employment laws. So we really have to be very specific about where are they and what are they doing. Okay. I want to just leave you with one thought, which is about fairness. All right. Pay transparency is about being fair. It's about paying people equally for equal work. It's about not cutting corners in this area, even if you can. So even though you've underpaid someone and they've never objected and they're your hardest worker, this is the year to true it up. Okay. And do it in 2024 if you can. Don't even wait until 2025. Give them what they need to get them where they should be. And that way we can start 2025 on equal footing and making sure that everybody is ready to accept the challenges that will inevitably come with a new calendar year. All right, everybody, thanks for listening today. It is my honor and true privilege to be able to have your ear 15 minutes a week. I hope you're finding the podcast useful. I'm always open to feedback and criticism and all kinds of things. So just let me know how I could be doing better. If there's things you'd like to see handled, if there's topics you'd like me to cover, I would always appreciate that feedback, and I take it very seriously. So I'm all ears, everyone. Thank you so much. Hope you're getting all your holiday stuff done. Don't forget to watch Love Actually. That is one of my favorite holiday traditions. If you haven't watched it, I love that movie. It has Hugh Grant. It's precious. It's adorable. I love it. It's amazing. It's not really kid-friendly, but it's super good. So Love Actually, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon. Workplace Wake Up, including our guests and hosts, do not provide legal advice in this podcast. Do not act upon any of the information discussed in this podcast without first consulting a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to spread the word, please share it with others. Post about it on social media and/or rate and review it. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, and email us at info@shawlawgroup.com.